Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host for this episode of Cut the Crop. And following on from some of our other podcasts, we've got another international speaker with us today, Gordon Rennie from Scotland, from Bonnie Fife in Scotland. Hello, Gordon. You're well known to a lot of New Zealand arable growers. You come out here regularly to visit us for extended periods of time, but we haven't seen you for a while, so how are you?
It's not bad, Alison. It's actually a year since I was out. I was out last year. I've got a small house in Blenheim, and I've got many, many contacts in New Zealand, from a Nuffield scholarship in 1994 to working as a young chap in Ashburton in 1974, when I first landed in New Zealand and stayed for quite a long time.
Yeah. So obviously, you're a independent agronomist, an arable farmer. So I thought it would be just really good for you to give us a little bit of an insight into what life is like for an arable grower in Scotland at the moment.
We're in a state of flux because clearly the crops that we harvested in August and September 21 were grown under the world as we knew it before Ukraine. So we thought £180 a tonne for wheat was respectable, with our inputs of fertiliser at £1 a kilo for nitrogen. And since then, the agflation has taken off because gas has gone through the roof, and you can't produce fertiliser without huge amounts of energy. And this season, any farmer who's lucky enough to have a few tons of wheat left in his shed, which is not many, they're getting £350 a tonne, which is quite phenomenal. But for next harvest, considering most people would have been budgeting for 160, 170 a year ago, the price for harvest 22 will be close to £300 a tonne. But the sting in the tail is that nobody knows if we'll be able to buy fertiliser, will it be available, and what will the price be for the crops that we'll be sowing later this year. So there's a great deal of uncertainty. And everyone's had to readjust this very valuable resource, nitrogen. And it's reassessed how people look after their crops. My main thing as an agronomist is the soil. And I'm a great fan of your Trish Fraser, not far from you, another Scottish lady who's done incredibly well. And I gave a speak to some people, and I've managed to borrow Trish, with her permission, one of her presentations about the value of the soil, a healthy soil, earthworms. So I'm trying to impress upon farmers that if you've got a healthy living soil where the crops can root, may pick up nutrients, your efficiency of your nutrients will be much, much higher. So now's the time to get soil health to the forefront, because nitrogen, phosphate and potash will never be cheap for a long time.
Yeah. I think that it's a message that is becoming very clear in New Zealand as well. I mean, urea has doubled in price in the last 9 months. And also, the whole availability of agrochemicals, we're recognising we're going to have to start ordering in a whole load of products, a year, 18 months in advance, because we're not 100% sure we're going to be able to get the material into New Zealand in the same time frame as we have in the past.
Well, I thought it was very interesting. The war in Ukraine has shown up people prepared to back Ukraine, and I think Britain's done a very good job. The people who have been very reluctant is Germany, and Germany relies heavily on Russian gas and oil. And I was intrigued to know that the boss of BASF warned the German government not to turn off Russian gas because BASF would no longer be able to function and produce the products that we all need. So that's an unintended consequence that you might not even think about. About this war.
So before we talk about Ukraine, give us a quick insight into Brexit. What impact has Brexit had, if any, on your growers back in Scotland?
Well, my scholarship was to New Zealand in 1994. It was called Farming Without Subsidies. And I think New Zealanders have done a fantastic job. And when you don't when you're not feather bedded, and let's face it, the Common Agricultural Policy is feather bedding. It's not index linked. So Sir James Dyson, who bought 38,000 acres in Lincolnshire 6 years ago, he gets 38,000 times 100 quid or something. So Brexit has happened. Farmers are very resilient. In New Zealand, you had a complete cut-off from subsidy. The Roger Douglas, Rogernomics. You were put off the edge of a cliff in New Zealand with no parachutes, and that was a tough one, very tough. But here we've got a soft landing out of subsidies over 3 or 4 years, and the farmers will still get the 3 billion quid for the end of this parliament. But we're changing over to a policy of public money for public goods, which I approve of. If you do good things on your farm, you'll fence off rivers, put in nectar-bearing plants, allow school kids to come out on open farm Sunday, and if you're a farmer who embraces your part in society, you should be rewarded for doing such things, but not just for growing wheat and having lambs. That's ridiculous.
So tell me, how does that work? How do you get funding to recognise what you've done? Do you have to keep a record of the public good that you do?
Well, in England, we've got a thing called the Sustainable Farming Initiative under ELMS. That's Environmental Land Management. So this is a system where what's happening in Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland to join these schemes and it's not a given now. It's not a given. You can join an ELM scheme, and the starting point is to do a soil test. So we're trying to kind of get base points where your soil is, your pH, maybe your carbon levels, and then if you farm in the manner, say you move away from ploughing, which is the easiest thing to maintain carbon, and it's all part of the the COP26 agenda, farming in a sustainable way that can be measured. There's going to be lots of people on farms, but I think it's basically breaking away from the EU. They said that the price of sheep would collapse because the French wouldn't take them. Well, last week my neighbour was selling old ewes at Sterling for 210 quid each because it was Ramadan. That's $450 for the price of sheep is high.
Yeah. So the reality is that Brexit has opened up. It might have closed down some opportunities, but it's opened up completely different ones.
Yeah, the European Union, if any of your New Zealand farmers come across, you must go to Brussels. You must have a trip to go to the heart of Brussels that I did 3 years ago with the National Farmers Union of Scotland. And you'll see massive gleaming buildings everywhere and a massive new Parliament building. And I said to someone, how many people work here? He said, well, look, Gordon, there's 4,000 chefs employed to feed this lot.
So let's talk about Ukraine, because I mean, although New Zealand, is aware of what's happening in Ukraine, and we understand that there will be, sort of impacts on global, supply and of key commodity products, I don't think that the general public, are as fully aware of the consequences and the impact of Ukraine as I think that you do in the UK. So just talk us through what's happening and the reality of this Ukraine situation from Gordon Rennie's point of view.
Well, I read the serious newspapers, not the comics, and the World Health Organization, the United Nations, because Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe and by far the biggest producer of sunflower oil, means that sunflower oil is rationed in supermarkets here. But the Ukrainian wheat and oils and maize, they go to the Middle East and a lot of those countries. And these people, we had the Arab Spring the last time food prices went through the roof. And there'd be a lot of discontent because wheat prices doubled. Sunflower oil might even run out. And the basic essentials of life in some of the poorer countries will be unaffordable. And so it's a big thing that's happening. For farmers over here, we've got a short-term gain on, cashing in on a high wheat price. But, agflation by the farmers weekly is up to 24%. Diesel, gas, power, all the things we need. So there's a global implication for countries, nations in the Middle East that will be deprived of basic foods. And that's going to be a huge worry. And people are talking about 100 million people being hungry. So that's very, very worrying. And I think that's one of the reasons you see Britain, America, suddenly pouring huge amounts of weaponry into Ukraine. And today, the British government's talking about sending fighter jets in to Ukraine. So the gloves are off in that war. It's, Putin rattled the nuclear button. Well, the gloves are off, and it's going to be massive because I think the West realizes that the disruption will be on a global scale. It'll be a humanitarian disaster. From there's a lot of Scots in Ukraine, like a lot of Scots in New Zealand, and my neighbours, Peter Thompson, his farm's just over here. So his older brother kept a farm. Peter became an agronomist. Massey Ferguson gave him a job in Ukraine 30 years ago. Loved the country, married a Ukrainian, speaks Ukrainian, manages 50,000 hectares in the Donbass region, right where the disputed area. And he was on a podcast, I think it's a Farmer's Guardian podcast, and he said his daughter, who is 20, who's a medical student, she and her dad, Peter, were in the garage siphoning petrol out of the lawnmowers to make Molotov cocktails. And, that is just, crazy. And in the West, Keith Dawson, Great Plains Group, there's a big farming company there on the beautiful land, growing lots of potatoes. And we're still trying to grow spuds. I've got a wee interest in that company. That's near Lviv. That's on the safer side of Ukraine. But there again, before they plant the tatties, is to check for Russian landmines and stuff like that. But I noticed Keith sent a picture. The Russians use these cruise missiles, horrible big things. But they drop one of the cases as they zoom into their target. And their cases are like the size of a 45-gallon drum with holes. And I see the Ukrainians are using them, they've turned them into barbecues. They've got so it's just a crazy time. But so Peter's very, he speaks to his farm managers. He said the Russians, of course, they just come into the farms and they want to hide the tanks in the farm buildings and the rocket launchers. And one of his farm managers knocking on the door, Russian guy, 5 a.m. He said, "We're taking over your farm. We're going to hide all our stuff in your farm buildings." if you don't cause us any trouble, you'll be safe. So that was, you can't argue with that. And that's just life over there. And it is, but they're trying to, every Ukrainian farmer is trying to sow the crops because President Zelensky has said that the farming must continue, despite the missiles and bombs. The vast majority of Ukraine, of course, is not affected. So he's appealing for diesel, for seeds, for fertilizers, as well as military aid. And it just shows you, we take food production for granted. We think, you might get a bad harvest in the Canterbury Plains because the weather's pretty crap. But it's a fragile world we live in, very fragile. And it just takes a crazy dictator to go, off-piste like Putin to put the whole world at risk. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
So can you see some positives coming out of any of this? I mean, is there a glimmer of hope?
And we never know when we're going to be challenged. And, we just don't. And everyone says, the young kids wouldn't, if a war came, but the war's come to Ukraine. And you've got teachers and taxi drivers and joiners and lawyers in the front line to defend their country.
Yeah, I mean, you've blown me away, Gordon, as you always do. I mean, it's a hard discussion to have on like a FAR podcast, but gosh, it's really interesting, and I think some of your comments will probably, they'll land fair and square with a lot of New Zealanders. So when do you think you're going to be back out to New Zealand?
Well, Alison, when I go around New Zealand, I go down to Southland, and what I do is I stop at all these little war memorials. You see them all over New Zealand, side of the road, little towns. And these are all these young Kiwis in 2 wars who came across to Europe, and because they couldn't come back, those memorials are the only memorials to them. And I go around New Zealand, and I think the New Zealanders are phenomenal. You're a great nation. But you've also got a very good climate. You can grow anything. I mean, my friend Eric Watson, who loves to grow big crops of wheat, he could grow big crops of anything in that beautiful soil. And what's amazed me in New Zealand is seeing how the climate and your soils that we all thought 30 years ago were good for sheep and wheat, the vineyards, the kiwi fruit, the avocados up in the north, the vast range of food, and you export 95% of your produce, and you're very good at it, and Fonterra are very good. So you're in the safest little corner of the world down there. Make sure no Russian oligarchs try to buy farms down there. That we don't want that though. And it's a great country. You're very blessed, and there's great affinity to Scotland. And Brexit means it's welcome home to our New Zealand cousins.
Good. Excellent. That's a lovely way to finish. Thanks very much, Gordon. I can see that you've got a nice drink there for you to relax with. So thanks very much, and I'm sure that we will have you back on again in another wee while to give us an update on your thoughts. So thanks a lot, and thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.